Canada has a productivity problem, and the Bank of Canada says it's urgent.
You know those signs that say, in an emergency, break the glass? Well, it's time to break the glass.
That's Carolyn Rogers, the Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. And yeah, she says things are bad. In terms of productivity, over the last few decades, the Canadian economy went from being about 88% as productive as the United States down to just 71% in 2022. We're now behind almost every other G7 country. And yet, we lead the G7 when it comes to having the most educated workforce, and we work more hours. So what's going on?
In the sprawling landscape of the Great White North, the future of most Canadians looks bleak and hangs on a fidgety balance. As the land descends into chaos with rising costs, economic uncertainty, and environmental catastrophe, one question looms large. Would Canadians ever be able to improve their lives and their children's lives again? In Canada, the outlook has seemed especially grim. Skyrocketing housing prices, stagnant wages, and a growing wealth gap have left many feeling trapped, with the dream of a comfortable life slipping further and further out of reach. And as the country teeters on the edge of crisis, a growing sense of despair and helplessness grips the nation. The hard truth is this: the standard of living in Canada is collapsing, and the future has never looked more uncertain. Recent reports have revealed that Canada is falling behind other OECD countries in various facets. According to the report, Canada was at or near the bottom with regard to the total number of physicians per capita, and was dead last when it came to receiving timely treatment in emergency care or access to a specialist. Productivity is a noteworthy facet of the economy, dwindling at a very fast rate. Firm-level studies indicate that Canada's most productive firms are not keeping up with globally leading firms, and other Canadian firms are falling even further behind. This story should be a three-alarm fire for policymakers in Ottawa and every provincial capital. In 2000, the Canadian workforce was 82% as productive as the U.S. workforce, measured in terms of real output, or value added, per hour worked. By 2020, that percentage had dropped to 77%, slightly above the OECD average, causing a lag behind other G7 nations. In other words, Canada's workforce is less productive than the US, France, Germany, United Kingdom, the Euro area average, Australia, and Italy. According to the latest data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Canada ranks 29th among 38 OECD countries for labor productivity. To put this in context, in the time a Canadian worker produces $1 worth of goods and services, a French worker makes $1.20 and an American $1.30, a 30% advantage. At the heart of this crisis lies a troubling trend that economists have dubbed collapsing productivity. But what exactly does this term mean, and why is it so crucial for the future of Canada and its people? In this video, we will delve into the complex factors contributing to collapsing productivity in Canada and explore its implications for the economy and society. In simple terms, productivity refers to the amount of output that a country or economy can produce per unit of input. It's the measure of how efficiently and effectively a nation can transform its resources, whether that be labor, capital, or raw materials, into the goods and services that drive economic growth and prosperity. When productivity is high, it means that a country is able to produce more with less, generating wealth and raising living standards for its citizens. However, when productivity falters, as it has been doing in Canada for decades now, it can have devastating consequences for the economy and for the people who depend on it. According to a report by the Business Council of Canada, Canada's productivity growth has been anemic for years, lagging behind that of other advanced economies like the United States and Germany. Canada is currently ranked 18th, and its GDP per hour worked at 42.5% of the number one ranked Ireland. Compared to the United States, Canadian productivity has diminished by 9% between 2000 and 2022, falling to roughly 72% of that of the US. This may not sound like a big difference, but over time it can have a profound impact on a country's standard of living. When productivity growth is slow, it means that the economy is not generating enough wealth to keep pace with rising costs and growing demands. It means that wages stagnate, businesses struggle to compete, and governments have less revenue to invest in critical services and infrastructure. The consequences of this collapsing productivity are felt in every corner of Canadian society. Consequently, the average Canadian Canadian families' standard of living has been declining for years, even as the cost of living continues to rise. According to the study, in 2022, the average Canadian family household income of $106,430 paid $48,199 in total taxes, or 45.3% of its income. For context, that same family spent $37,827, or 35.6% of its income, on food, shelter, and clothing. In other words, Canadian families paid more in taxes than they spent on basic necessities. This means that for the first time in recent history, Canadian families are actually earning less than they are spending, a trend that is unsustainable in the long run. But it's not just families that are feeling the squeeze. Businesses too are struggling to keep up with rising costs and declining profitability. According to a Chamber of Commerce report, the cost of doing business in Canada has been rising faster than inflation for years, driven by factors like rising taxes, regulatory burdens, and energy costs. The average Canadian business faced costs that were more increase than those in the United States, leading to higher Canadian prices and making it harder for them to compete and invest in growth. And when businesses struggle, it has a ripple effect throughout the entire economy, leading to job losses, reduced investment, and slower economic growth. The average Canadian family pays $200 more than they should for food annually, so $1,000 in extra food costs over 5 years means much to poor Canadian families, and government policy is to blame. But collapsing productivity is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to Canada's declining standard of living. There are a multitude of other factors at play, each of which is contributing to the growing sense of unease and frustration among Canadians. Among the biggest challenges is the high cost of living, which has been rising faster than wages for decades. In Canada, the cost of essentials like housing, food, and childcare has been increasing at a rate that far outpaces inflation, leaving many Canadians struggling to make ends meet. Most recently, the average home cost in Canada reached a record high. The average home sold price in the Greater Toronto Area increased 0.3% year over year to $1,156,167 for April of 2024. This has put home ownership out of reach for not just Torontonians, but many Canadians, particularly young people and those on lower incomes, forcing them to spend an ever greater share of their income on rent or to live in substandard or overcrowded conditions. Food prices, too, have been rising at an alarming rate, driven by factors like climate change, supply chain disruptions, and rising energy costs. According to Statistics Canada, prices for food purchased from stores rose 7.8% on an average annual basis in 2023. While this was a smaller increase than in 2022, at positive 9.8%, it was still larger than the annual average increase in the all-items CPI. Consumers also paid 6.5% more to eat at restaurants annually in 2023, following a similar increase in 2022. For many Canadians, particularly those on fixed incomes or facing job insecurity, this has meant making difficult choices between putting food on the table and paying for other essentials like healthcare or education. And then there's the issue of childcare, which has become increasingly unaffordable for many Canadians. The number of parents who say it's been difficult to get childcare increased from 53 to 62%. This can represent a significant portion of a family's income, particularly for those on lower incomes or with multiple children. But the high cost of living is just one of the many challenges facing Canadians today. Another significant issue is the problem of inflation, which has been eroding the purchasing power of Canadian dollars for years. According to Statistics Canada, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, rose 2.9% on a year-over-year basis in March, up from a 2.8% gain in February. This means that the same amount of money that bought a certain amount of goods and services in the past now buys less, effectively reducing the standard of living for Canadians. And while the Bank of Canada has taken steps to try to rein in inflation, such as raising interest rates, this has also had the effect of making borrowing more expensive, further squeezing Canadian households and businesses. However, perhaps the most controversial factor contributing to Canada's collapsing standard of living is immigration. While immigration has long been a cornerstone of Canadian society, helping to drive economic growth and cultural diversity, some argue that the current levels of immigration are unsustainable and are putting undue pressure on the country's resources and infrastructure. In 2021, more than 8.3 million people, or almost one quarter, 23.0% of the population, were or had ever been a landed immigrant or permanent resident in Canada. This was the largest proportion since Confederation, topping the previous 1921 record of 22.3% and the highest among the G7. While immigration can bring many benefits to a country, such as filling labor shortages and spurring innovation, it can also put pressure on housing, healthcare, and other social services, particularly if the necessary investments are not made to keep pace with population growth. Demand for housing in Canada is expected to continue to outpace supply in the coming years, driven in large part by immigration. The report notes that while immigration is not the only factor driving housing demand, it is a significant contributor, particularly in regions where the majority of immigrants settle. This increased demand for housing has led to rapidly rising prices and rents in many parts of the country, making it increasingly difficult for Canadians, particularly those on lower incomes or in precarious employment, to find affordable and suitable housing. According to a Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives report, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto reached $2,521 per month, while in Vancouver it reached $2,700 per month. But the impact of immigration on Canada's standard of living goes beyond just the housing market. The country's healthcare system, which is already struggling with long wait times, staffing shortages, and increasing costs, is also feeling the strain of a growing and aging population. For the third year in a row, the life expectancy at birth of Canadians fell from 81.6 years in 2021 to 81.3 years in 2022. The decline in 2022 of negative 0.3 years was more significant than in 2021 at negative 0.1 years, and was half of that observed from 2019 to 2020 at negative 0.6 years. Similarly, in just 2022, there were a recorded 334,623 deaths, a 7.3% increase over 2021. This growth was observed in all provinces and territories except Nunavut. The age-standardized mortality rate, which accounts for fluctuations in a population's age structure over time, also climbed, rising from 907.2 deaths per 100,000 people in 2021 to 972.5 in 2022. The age-standardized mortality rate in 2019 was 830.5 fatalities before the COVID-19 pandemic. The rapid pace of immigration has also raised concerns about social cohesion and integration, particularly in a country as diverse as Canada. While Canada has long been celebrated for its multiculturalism and inclusion, the current levels of immigration have led to concerns about the formation of ethnic enclaves, language barriers, and cultural tensions in some communities. Furthermore, the impact of immigration on Canada's environmental and natural resources is another area of concern, particularly as the country grapples with the challenges of climate change and sustainability. While immigration is not the primary driver of environmental degradation, the rapid pace of population growth and urbanization can put significant pressure on Canada's ecosystems, resources, and infrastructure. Ultimately, Canada's collapsing standard of living is a crisis that threatens the very foothold of the nation. It is a crisis born out of decades of neglect, myopic policies, and misplaced priorities, of a failure to invest in the things that truly matter. And while there are no easy answers or quick fixes, one thing is clear. If actions are not taken, if the Ottawa government allows this crisis to deepen and spread, the consequences will be dire. Innocent residents will witness more poverty, inequality, social unrest, and a loss of faith in the institutions and values that have long defined the Canadian nation. If you like this video, hit the like button and help us spread the word. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on our latest news and analysis. In the meantime, check out one of these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.